Welcome to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast, where we help new and beginning teachers navigate through those crazy first years of teaching so you can maintain your sanity and personal life. Here's your host, Kim Lapre.
Welcome to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast, a proud member of the Education Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kim Lapre, and this is the podcast for new and beginning teachers who don't want to just survive those first few years, but actually thrive. Today on episode 45, I'm going to be talking to you guys all about getting your students to participate in class. Now, I was motivated to do this episode based on a question that I had seen in a Facebook group, and it's something that I actually think is pretty common. Now, before I dive into this episode, I do want to remind you guys that I have an invitation to all of you to leave a voicemail telling me why you love teaching, and also giving us some tidbits and tips on how to survive this particular time in the school year. I've had several people call in already, and you guys have hopefully had an opportunity to listen to that. And I really, really love these. I love sharing them with you guys so that we can get different perspectives from teachers all around the country. So if you feel inclined and, if you have just, a few minutes of time to do this, I would really, really appreciate that.
Hi, this is Kim Polishuk
and Jen Giffen, hosts of Shooks and Giff, the podcast,
a proud member of the Education Podcast Network.
Just like the show you're listening to right now.
The opinions expressed are those of each individual host.
Be sure to check out all of our other great podcasts by visiting edupodcastnetwork.com.
And get ready, because the learning begins in 3, 2, 1.
So as I had mentioned in the introduction, I found a question on Facebook that really resonated with me, and I wanted to share it with you. So here it goes. Does anyone else struggle to connect with their students? Do you frequently receive blank stares when you ask for any questions? Practically beg students to freely participate. Tell them over and over, "You got this," and "I believe in you," but only to receive negative feedback from students. I can't be the only one feeling this way, right? I absolutely love being a teacher, and up until this year, I have never ever had this problem. I don't know if I'm reading them wrong or what. I'm just at a loss. If you've experienced this kind of thing, how do you try to remedy this? Were you successful? What are your strategies for building class culture that won't take away too much instructional time? So, this is a real issue that most teachers have faced at some point. For some teachers, it happens every year and all the time, while for others, it might just be maybe 1 year or just one class or period of students if you teach secondary. Either way, it can be really deflating as a teacher when you're trying to do everything you can to connect with your students and get them to participate. I typically find this happening, though, at the beginning of the year, since in my district, the 7th grade population consists of students from different feeder elementaries. So while a student may know some of the other students in the class, most of them find themselves surrounded by strangers. So, of course, this definitely makes them more shy and reserved, but as they get to know me and each other through frequent seat changes, I find that the students open up, so it's not really a problem. But I'm going to tell you guys that this doesn't happen by accident. So I wanted to share 5 tips, 5 steps on how I intentionally structure my class to facilitate discussion and participation. So step 1, I build relationships with students, and I'm pretty sure that all of us do this. So this is through getting to know you activities, telling short stories about myself, and using pop culture references as examples. And something that I like to do, and I let myself do, because I can't help it sometimes, is I go on tangents during class discussions, which gets them excited and more engaged. Now, you know how this happens. You'll be discussing something and it'll remind you, or maybe even one of the students, about something else. So you talk about that something else for a couple of minutes. Students, will start having side conversations. Some will raise their hands to volunteer their opinions, and it can turn into 3 to 5 minutes of chaos and excitement. You may be thinking that this is definitely a time waster. However, I find that the result is a more engaged class that's eager to raise their hand and participate. Just by having a side conversation that's off topic and we get excited about something or laugh about something, and then it starts to feel like a family in the classroom. So, in addition to doing your normal getting to know you activities, I encourage you to sometimes let yourself go a little bit off topic, a little bit off task, because, during those moments, the students also need a brain break and they get to see that their teacher also needs one and that their teacher is human and not, isn't just business the entire time. All right. So step 2, I require students to talk to each other. So what I do is during our warm-ups, I first let them complete the activity on their own, and then I have them share out in their groups of 4. And I'll designate which person in each group is going to start sharing. And also I require that when a student is sharing, they're not allowed to change their answer and they're not allowed to finish their answer. They have to be active listeners. And also whoever is the person talking, they have to read exactly what they wrote. They're not allowed to start reading and then look up and just have a conversation. I want them to read exactly what they wrote. And everyone is required to participate. And how I ensure this is by circulating throughout the room and listening to them while they talk. And this helps if there's like a particularly quiet student or someone who tries to get away with doing nothing. And with me, using proximity or just kind of gently reminding them, it ensures that they take their turn. After each person has had a chance to share, then I use participation cards to call on individual students. Now, this practice is key to getting more willing participants, and I do this with pretty much everything that we learn in my class. It's always you try it on your own, you share with your peers, you answer out. And here's why. You have to let them do their own thinking first because, there's always those students who want to blurt out an answer and the rest of the students don't get any thinking time. And that can be really frustrating because you can see them like trying and then one person ruins it for everyone. So you have to give them an opportunity to figure it out on their own. And then the big part is letting them check with their group to make sure they got the right answer. You have to let them practice their answer. Even if it's a free write and there's no real answer, reading what they wrote down aloud ensures that they can catch their own mistakes. If you don't let students practice first, you're increasing the risk of them being wrong when called upon. Now, while this risk diminishes over time with a proper teacher response, which I'm going to talk about next, the students still need to work it out on their own and with their group before you put them on the spot. So I can't emphasize this enough because if a student had an incorrect answer and they heard the correct answer from their peers, then when you call on them, they're not going to feel stupid. So make sure that you take the time to let them do this. Work it out on their own, work it out with their peers. It doesn't have to be a group of 4. It could also be a think, pair, share. But I like groups of 3 or 4 because if their neighbor has the wrong answer or if their neighbor just copied off of them, then, there's more opportunity for them to get the answer wrong. All right, step 3. When it comes time for calling on students randomly, we have to be careful how we address incorrect answers. These could be legitimately wrong answers. Maybe they're off the wall comments from someone who just wants attention or just students saying, I don't know. How you respond to these will have a tremendous impact on how much participation you get throughout the year. So first, you need to get the words no or wrong or that's incorrect out of your lexicon. Those words, they will kill the soul of that student and you won't get anything out of them the next time you call on them. Instead, if an answer is wrong, you have to think quickly on the spot how to respond. So if you can see why they would have answered that way, then tell them that. You could say, Gina, I can totally see why you got that answer because it almost looks like a simile, but it's not. Remember that even though it has the word like, it has to compare 2 things. It's tricky, right? So if you answer in this way, guys, you're simultaneously validating why that student would have gotten that answer and communicating that that student isn't stupid. So in this case, Gina doesn't lose face in front of the whole class, and she doesn't feel so bad about herself. Now, if it's really wrong, then try giving them a little help. So when we're doing sentence corrections and a student can't find anything else wrong, but something's still there, sometimes I'll zoom in on that section, or I'll point to the general vicinity of the answer, or if they still can't figure anything else, I'll ask that person's group to help them out. I'll say, hey group, can you help him or her out right now? Thank you. And then they'll kind of whisper the answer to that person, and then they'll answer out. I don't just let them flail and feel shameful for not knowing or even for not paying attention. I want them to always feel that the risk was worth taking, even if they didn't have the right answer. This is especially important for those students that already have low self-esteem. I have one student who just struggles in class so much academically, and he tries to hide it by shrugging it off or just saying, I don't know. And so when I call on him, he'll just kind of shake his head and just give me kind of a little bit of an attitude like, I don't know. So the times that I did get him to answer, someone else had already given that answer. And you know what I did? Instead of saying, sorry, someone already said that, I just said, you're right. And then I moved on to someone else. So I don't have to shame that student or say, nope, someone already took that. Try again, different answer. You know, when you have someone who struggles like that, let them have the win. Even if everybody else knows that that answer was already taken, that person obviously didn't. So just let them have the win. And that way they're going to be more inclined to give answers in the future if they can trust you to not make them feel bad about themselves. Along the same lines is step 4. Think about how you'll communicate with them when they don't turn in an assignment, or maybe they only complete part of it, or they just in general fail to meet your expectations in some way. As teachers, we have a tremendous ability to inadvertently lift up our students' spirits or completely crush them. Now, don't get me wrong. We definitely have to teach students accountability, and we have to enforce our policies, or the students just aren't going to complete an assignment on time. And if we let everything or anything slide, students are going to take advantage of that. This I know. But before you lay into them for turning in yet another assignment late, I want you to take a moment to envision yourself in a meeting with one of your administrators. They call on you to talk about your low data, your late paperwork, about coming to school late frequently, about not participating in PLC, for somehow upsetting a parent, etc. How would you want to be spoken to? And with what tone? What words would make you feel like absolute crap? How would you want to be reprimanded so that you don't go back to your classroom crying or feeling like you want to quit teaching? So think about that. And when you come up with those answers, write those sentence starters down, however you would start the conversation or however it would be phrased or framed for you. Write it down and maybe even sort those by scenarios for your students. And then I want you to use them. Because however you would want to be spoken to, that's how you need to speak to students. Their self-esteem is even worse and lower than ours. So just imagine how you would want to be spoken to in that situation. And then finally, step 5, I try not to communicate to the students that the material is more important than their well-being. I've observed teachers who just fly through material, regardless of whether or not their students were ready to move on. And I know that sometimes you feel like you have to because of the pacing and, you have to get through all of this before the test. But whenever I observe this, the students feel deflated and confused, and a lot of times that results in less participation. Now, if I really have to move on and a student says, Miss LaPree, I still don't get it, I'll give them a final analogy or example. And then I do let them know that they'll have plenty of time to practice it later. So that way they feel like, okay, I don't get this, but she's going to give me a second or third or fourth chance. That makes them feel better, and it makes them feel like they're not stupid. And you know what? It's true too. I will give them another opportunity. I'm constantly spiraling concepts into future lessons. And so I use those opportunities to reteach if I have to. But I never tell students, well, we need to move on and get through all of this material. Because the thing is, that makes students feel devalued. Like the material is more important than their learning. So you can bet that if you say something like that, students won't participate if you shut them down. So if you're facing a room full of blank stares, I'd like you to take a moment to reevaluate your delivery. And if you want the most impact, you really should videotape a lesson. That way you can really pinpoint where you might be inadvertently sabotaging your relationship with your students. So don't forget to leave a voicemail so that you can be featured on a future episode. And something that occurred to me that I haven't actually mentioned in a long time is if you're enjoying this podcast, if you are subscribing and you come back here every Monday to hang out with me, which you guys, I appreciate so much. And if you're on iOS, on some kind of Apple device, could you take a minute to just leave a rating? And if you have time, a review. I understand that you guys are busy, or maybe you're driving or doing your hair while you're listening to this. But if you have time, I'd really appreciate it if you could do that. Sometimes the podcast doesn't even show up when people are searching for it or just searching for school or teachers because it doesn't have enough ratings and reviews yet. So if you have a moment in your week, I'd really appreciate it. And as I said before, I really, really am grateful for you guys and for hanging out with me. And I hope you have a fabulous week.
Thanks for listening to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast. Love this episode? Head over to Apple Podcast or Google Play to subscribe, rate, and leave a review.